Is this showing now?
Looks good.
Okay.
Your desktop is showing.
Yeah. How's it now?
Good. Good.
Is that better? Okay. Well, I call this From Crayons to Computers because I'm trying to think about why I do the things that I like to do now, which is really graphic design. I had to think back into why I got started being interested in this in the first place. And so this has kind of led me through a pathway, and I just wanted to track it through with you. Hopefully it'll take no more than about 20 minutes. But, and I'm happy to get, discussion, questions, or whatever afterwards. But let me start in. I was born in 1939, but this was me in 1942, and it looks like I was really contemplating, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Or I'm not sure what the right caption would be. But my parents, as I began to grow up, would do various things for me that they thought would help me. One was ballet lessons, because I kept tripping over things. We went through trumpet lessons, we went through piano lessons. My dad really was a chemical engineer, so he thought that might be interested in. And finally, when I got into college and began to look at calculus and related things, my math professor said, well, don't worry about too much of this math stuff, because you're really a visual learner. You're really going to be able to understand things better graphically. So don't worry about it. So I have worried about it a little bit, but I'm really focusing much more on my graphics. And I wanted to show you something that I think probably a lot of people have gone through and done for themselves. That's the Myers-Briggs type indicator. And this tells you a little bit about where I'm coming from. I think I'm an INTJ. And for people that know what the Myers-Briggs is all about, the I part of it is really pretty strong. The intuition part of it is strong. Thinking, feeling, it's kind of a mixed bag, sort of balanced. And then the judging is quite strong. And so what this really mean, for me anyway, is the I is really, I have an imagination in my mind. I have ideas and impressions. I like to organize things, which I think is sometimes a plus. I'm future oriented. I try to recognize the patterns and trends of things, to see how things are fitting together. And then this logic and objectivity, well, that's been kind of strong, but as I grow older, I'm finding I'm really making decisions more in light of how it's going to affect other people and how I work with other folks. And then the J part, planned and organized approach, that's very strong in my profile, because I really like to know what's going to happen next, what's going to happen next year. I don't like to just approach a chaotic situation without trying to work. So I guess my major light bulbs in my life have been with regard to that, is that being an introvert, I really realized that I needed to develop the ability to graphically communicate and to really draw my ideas. And since my brain was really wired to think more visually, I had good spatial perception, good pattern recognition, all that. And what I began to learn was that, okay, it's not enough for me to know how my learning style is. I need to learn about what other people, how they process it. So most of us are really visually oriented, even if we are we respond well with our ears, and we can say things, we can write things. The way we see the world is literally through seeing. And so when you don't have that full capacity, I'm sure Dick could relate to this a lot, that you really begin to rewire yourself and learn how to learn in other ways. So my own contribution to this was that I really needed to figure out how to communicate involving graphic and visual solutions. Now, when I was in school, in college, I wrote a paper for my sociology class, and it was all about the city of Brasilia, a new city in Brazil, which is still there, had been developed, started in the 60s. And I began to look at that and be very fascinated by the simplicity of the form and shape. And this is a note from my professor, and she hoped that I would consider being an architect or city planner. And I really had decided that, yeah, that was pretty interesting. And so I got a little bit of encouragement along the way from her. Now, Nancy would recognize one of the people in this slide up in the corner here. Jim Goodell was up in the upper left-hand corner of this photo. This is my urban design class from 1967, and that's University of Pennsylvania, where our mentor and the rest of us really learned from each other about how to work in the city, how to develop city plans, how to visualize things, how to learn from what you see. And use this later on. This is a project in Los Angeles, out in Wilshire Boulevard, to do some very complex urban problems by using the stuff that I learned back in graduate school. This led to a project in some projects in the Middle East. This was one in Abu Dhabi for 100,000 people. So it got to be a large scale problem that I could get into and work on, partly because I could recognize the big patterns of things and work them in with transportation and sociology and a lot of other factors. But there were some real mentors along the way too. I wanted to mention some of them as I go through this. One of them was Ian McHarg, that you may have heard about. Ian died several years ago, but he wrote a book called Design with Nature, which is still being referred to today. He's still kind of a demigod among people who are in the landscape and planning fields. And this diagram on the right is a thing that I did for a landscape firm, and it illustrated how to conserve water that falls onto the ground rather than letting it run off. So I would have to say this project was really influenced heavily by him. Now, when I was going through my young adult professional life, I did have some I don't know whether you'd call them heroes, but they were people that were really people of great note to me. One was Le Corbusier, a French person. Jean-Paul Jeanneret was his. Juan Miró, artist, Spanish artist, who was at Harvard when I was at MIT, and a sculptor, Alexander Calder, who we know his work, we see it here in Southern California and all over. But these were people that really knew how to deal with physical, visual form. And I got really very charmed by the whole idea that you could plan something, you could draw it up, but you could also build it, and it could be wonderful. Now, Peter Batchelor is another one of my marker people. He died last year, but he got me involved in some projects where we pulled together pro bono planning teams to go out and work with communities. This was one up in Washington State, right on the Columbia River. And I'm standing over here on the right looking at one at Larry Morrison, actually was another one of our village members, who's the guy at the board presenting things. And we were working there with the city. But I began to really realize that not only I could think of things, but other people with other disciplines had big roles to play. So a couple of other mentors here are people that I have taken cues from because they knew how to deal with information in a visual form. Richard Gorman, a guy named Edward Tufte, who has written several books about how to describe processes. The diagram on the right is one that I did at Stanford, where I was attempting to communicate how to put their infrastructure together with the buildings and how to plan a site and make sure that you had water, sewer, all the services that you needed from it. So it was a way of visualizing something that really helped me explain the process. If you look at the London Tube map, or you look at the map of Washington, DC Metro, this is another kind of inspiration source for me, because I realized that someone had taken the trouble to look at a very complex situation and try to organize it so that other people could understand it. I did something of a somewhat similar nature in Denver several years ago, where I took on the upper right or upper left here, diagram of the transit system. And then the lower left is a circumferential highway that went around. And I cited those as places where it seemed that growth in these green ovals was happening. And so I began to communicate it in a very simple kind of graphic diagrammatic way. This was at Stanford, where we developed a grid from the old Frederick Law Olmsted plan for Stanford's campus. It was 100 years ago or more. And now they've built actually some walkways and pathways through the campus, which really have helped to organize the bicycles, the pedestrian traffic, and all of that. Other things like, here's a diagram of a process. This is a planning process in the Middle East. You know, lots of players, lots of locations, lots of phases, lots of milestones, but in a graphic way that people could actually see it and understand it. You could try to describe this thing verbally, but you just wouldn't be able to do it. Almost at the end of my career, I developed an app, and it was called Carbon Planner. And what it did was to forecast and show you how to mitigate greenhouse gases from various kinds of projects, construction projects in the state of California. And this was a screen from that, where you took all kinds of buildings and said, if we build these in the state of California, in Pasadena or other places, here's how much carbon you generate. And then I wanted to make it so that there's a little thermometer that when you generated the carbon and then you mitigated it, the thermometer would reduce. It would show you how you were doing some good for the environment. So that was something I really learned a lot from doing. Now to sort of shift gears a bit, these are some graphics from Sister Carita Kent, who was with the Sisters of Immaculate Heart in Los Angeles. And she, as maybe many of you know about, was a graphic artist, but also a social sort of prophet. And she would combine graphics with images, with messages, and create these wonderfully attractive things. She's become kind of a classic in that genre. I took some of these are a couple of mine that I did for the left one for All Saints, picking up on some of the liturgy. And then one on the right, taking another carol, Christmas carol, and actually trying to translate it into some graphics. So I was inspired by that. This is a picture of, this is actually 4 different graphics, 1, 2, 3, and 4 as they go across. And what it is the Amanda Gorman inaugural speech that she did for Joe Biden when he was inaugurated in 2021. And it's all of her poem from first to last. I looked at it and thought, oh my gosh, this thing is so long. How do I understand it? Well, I found that I understood it better graphically if I tried to break it down into some pieces and then begin to highlight parts of it. So that's how this one part was generated. Here's another inspiration for me. This is a group of African-American women in Alabama. Gee's Bend is the name of the group. And they've been, their work has been hung in museums all over the world. They're very well known in the art world, but it's a totally indigenous kind of art form. They really didn't go to art school or study anything, but they produced the most amazing, to me, graphics, very inspirational. So I, on the right-hand side, tried to take some inspiration from what they had done. And even from the city, if you take a city map, like this would be a map of Washington, DC, and see what is the beauty in that. Is that a diagram that you can really have some fun with? Well, I tried to take that and really begin to play with it. So that became part of my art as well. Downtown Los Angeles on Broadway several years ago, this would be back in the 1980s. John Tuitt John Tuitt, by the way, was head of the Community Redevelopment Agency at that time. And I did a project, I didn't even know John, but I did a project on Broadway, which was supposed to herald the renewal of Broadway. They were going to be developing a kind of a Central South American theme along Broadway, and it already had that. There were all sorts of Latin American storefronts, businesses going on. And so we were just trying to celebrate that. So I took a lot of images from those iconography from that part of the world. Now, this is what I'm speaking to now is how you produce the art. This, of course, is a silk screen, somebody running a silk screen. And the graphic on the right is one that I did with a silk screen. Every one of the colors has to be a different pull across the screen. And you eventually get these, you can get these wonderful, wonderful saturated colors out of it. And so I just loved that. What I didn't love was the tedium of setting up the screens, pulling all the graphics, cleaning up everything. The chemicals are awful. And so I began to really transition away from doing that. And I'm now working, this is today, this is what my screen looks like. I work differently. And this, when I set up my computer, this is what the screen looks like. It's got little tools over here on the left-hand side of the screen. But some of that stuff in the middle is the kind of thing you can do. You can take these different tools and sort of begin to squiggle them across the screen and eventually develop some graphics with that. So it's a totally computerized way of doing things. But once you get going with it, then you begin to get in the swing of it, and it really becomes as easy as a paintbrush or a pencil and pen. And so I have done a lot with this genre. This is a page from my website, which is patdoggraphics.com. And when you get into it, if you just type that in, it'll bring you right to it. But what it's got is 6 different galleries that show some examples of the things that I've just been explaining. They're all digital, but they're all different parts of the world, different ideas. There's happy birthday cards, happy anniversary cards, things like that. And some of the examples of that are recent. Now, these are very simple forms and shapes, but the medium makes a lot of difference. I mean, you may not do this kind of thing if you were doing something in impressionistic oils or some other technique, but to me, the graphic quality comes from the impact of the color. Another thing I like is that I can change things. And these are 2 different graphics. One's called Bright, the other one's called Winter Farm. And I think you can see which one is which, but they're the same graphic basically. And you can just take things and you can then do a number of other riffs from that. So that's kind of a fun thing too. Here's one that was done from a sketch. This is one that I did on a trip that we took to Italy. And it was a rough sketch. There's not much to that. You can finish it off in different ways. I decided to take it and run it through the same computer process and then embellish it a little bit. So you can see it's a little different, but it's still got that same feeling of the hillside village. Here's one. This is my logo for my patdoggraphics.com, and it came from a rough sketch that I did. Just a little sketch of a street, and taking it into color was the next thing I did with it. Here's another one that's taken from a photo. This is somewhere, I think it's in Norway, and it's on a fjord. And here's an interpretation of that on the right-hand side, and it's using these same. I haven't always done that kind of work. I have done in the past a lot of this type of thing. This is the pen and ink sketches, pencil sketches. And the one in the upper right, by the way, is not one of those. This is really computer graphic. But these other ones are just pen and ink things that I did when I was out just sketching what I saw in the world. This one, I don't know if Paul has signed to us, but Paul Rao was our younger daughter's first and second grade teacher when we first moved to Pasadena. And so when she graduated, so to speak, out of second grade, we did this little thing for her because she had such a wonderful classroom and they did so many activities that I pulled together this little sort of tribute to her to try to be a cartoon showing what we loved about our daughter being in her classroom. We did a lot of these for teachers in our kids' schools in Pasadena. Other things you can do with the computer, by the way, that are kind of fun. These are taking some Muppets. And here's the Swedish chef and this other guy, I can't remember his name. But this was for a friend of ours, and she had these different interests. And so we said, well, whatever you're doing, we're here to help you. It was sort of trying to be kind of a funny birthday card for her. This is one, we have a couple friends of ours up in Portland who used to be in Pasadena, David and Ricky Perry. And he's a very big McDonald's fan, and she really likes The Simpsons. So we took that American Gothic and decided to have some fun with that and cartoon it up a bit. So this is the last, it's just showing, this is my 80th birthday in Pasadena. I had a pop-up art show that lasted for 2 hours one afternoon over at the Armory or Armory Center for the Arts. I think some of you may have been there. It was a great time. We just had a lot of fun. And then on the right-hand side, my family, myself on my right-hand side, our daughter Leslie, and then Marcia, our younger daughter Lisa, her husband Daryl, and Sammy, their son, in the front. Excuse me. So that's really my show. And I just wanted to stop the screen share and let us talk about it. You can ask me whatever you want, or hoot and holler, or say, I've had enough, I'm leaving, whatever you want to do. But I thought I'd try to tell that story. Now, I hope the sound was on during all that.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah. When we record with the sound.
Okay,
Well, that
great.
was fabulous. As an artist, I am absolutely blown away at all that you've done. And I've never, ever thought of city planning as being particularly artistic.
Mhm.
Boy, I look at it differently now. So does anyone have any comments they want to make or any questions they have for Pat? This is
Well,
your chance.
Yeah, I would like, Pat, if you would take some of the graphics that you did. I mean, you showed us the graphics and they all look wonderful to the extent I can see them. I would like it if you would take some specific thing that you did and talk through what are the graphic principles. How did you do it, and what did you think about, and what choices did you make, and how did that manifest itself in the finished work?
I don't have anything other than what was just on the show. You want me, I could back up and go through some of that, but mostly it's what I'm doing right now on that process is to take some. I have, first of all, idea. Let's say it's I want to do a little coastal, excuse me, coastal fishing village or a town. Now I got to have some source for that. I can put something together out of my head and begin to sketch it. Sometimes I'll do that. Other times I'll go into the web and just try to find some pictures of things. And you can find pictures of anything you want. So even those last cartoons, those all came from the web. Every bit of it came from the web, and I just put them together with a little cut and pasting program that I have. And then that's a base. And then over that, the program that I have is pretty simple, but it has the ability to layer things. So you can put images in front of each other. You can hide things. So I'll make another layer, and I'll take whatever I want to take out of the base. And the bases are usually more complex than you'd ever want to look at. I mean, when you see excuse me, somebody who's a good impressionist painter or realist painter, their objective is to show you as much as they can of what they see. My objective is exactly the opposite. It's really to show you as what I think are the basics of what I see. So if the whole idea is that there's a focal point and there's an object in it and there's some background, I try to take away everything else and out of that base information and just put what I want in it. So it's, I guess you'd call it a reductive process. There's a friend of ours, Barbara Kerwin, that is an artist, that when she saw what I did, she said, "Oh, that's reductive art." And I said, "Oh, well, that's interesting to know." But it's really trying to make things simple. And actually, that graphic ability isn't just unrelated to anything else. It's really related to years and years and years of trying to figure out in a complex city planning process. And the city, of course, is very, very complex. But if you start looking at how to solve a problem or propose a plan, what you really want to do is, of course, have awareness of and acknowledge the complexity, but really be able to tell people about what's really important. What's, like Jack Palance said in City Slickers, the main thing. What's the main thing here? And then that's what usually comes across, hopefully, in the graphic. And then I'll try to embellish it a little bit and really try to have some fun with it. But it's really fun having the city as kind of a learning ground for this, because you really begin to figure out how to sift out the things not that meaningful and really pull forward the things that are meaningful that you can really build on. So essentially, that's what the graphic process is all about. But Dick, that's a good question. I really thought about trying to show how this works, and maybe I could do that sometime on one of your blogs. Is kind of walk through that. It is a lot of fun. There's no rocket science to it, though. It's really just think about what's important to you and try to see if anybody else can understand it.
Yeah, well, what I take away from that is that you look at a scene, like if you do a sketch, and then you're looking for what are the simple elements that really convey the message, and then you translate that into a simplified graphic to convey the message. But let me go a little bit further. There are a couple of things that you mentioned. You mentioned the Broadway project where you picked up Hispanic influences and said, okay, you're going to put that in there to simplify and tell that story. And I'd like you to go further there. And the other one that really intrigues me is the transportation maps. And there are a lot of issues that you got to deal with there to figure out how to make one of those transportation maps intelligible. And I'd like to hear you talk about those a little bit more.
Okay, well, let's take the banners. Those banners that you saw on the slide were up on Broadway for about 2 months. That's all they would take, actually, because the weather really gets them. You know, the sun fades it, the wind comes up. We had a windstorm about 2 days after these things. Some of them were put up, and it just tore them up. Really, they were not installed correctly, and so we had to go back and do it again. But how they got was, first of all, they wanted something very bright, and that street is not simple. It's got a lot of old brick buildings, a lot of signs and stuff. So that whatever was up there had to be just hit you right in the eye. They wanted several blocks of this, so that it really had to be kind of a variety of things as you went down the street. And when I was looking at the theme, they were trying to say, "Oh, it's really Latinx kind of environment." And when you go down still today on a Saturday, Sunday, that's what it is. And it was even more so then. And so I researched some of the iconography. There were things from Peru that had to do with grains of wheat. There were other things that had to do with serpents and some of the classic zigzag patterns that you see in Southwest pottery. So I pulled a lot of those together and reviewed them with the staff. And between us, we picked probably a dozen of those. And then we had to decide how to scale these up. So it's like Christo kind of wrapping a building, you know, when he looks at a bridge and wants to wrap it with nylon. You have to figure out, okay, you have the idea, now you have to put it up there in the world and make it work. And so the way this got translated was I had little drawings that were 8.5 by 11 size, but then they got scaled up to banners 4 feet by 10 feet. And they were paired, and they all went on these huge, if you're ever on Broadway, you'll see these huge streetlights, which are classic old Beaux-Arts streetlights with arms on them. And we engineered them, and we did the engineering on them and found that they were strong enough to withstand wind forces on these huge banners, because we had, 80 square feet of banner on each it's like a sail on a sailboat. Is the mast going to hold up? So we had to figure that out. And then I did a whole map of the Broadway showing where they could be, where they would be set up. And then we had a fascinating part, which was how are we going to fabricate these things? And so they ended up being fabricated out of very heavy duty nylon. They were done, frankly, in a sweatshop in South Los Angeles. And it's the only way that the Community Redevelopment Agency could afford it, apparently. I didn't even contract for the thing, but I found out later that's how they were done. And they were done to scale. And then we had another company that came out, like a billboard company, just to hang them up on the street. And they were just dazzling, but for a short period of time. They were up and then they were down. But it was, to me, it was a thrill. Marcia and I went down there with some friends on, I think it was a New Year's Day, just to see what they were like, because they'd gone up the previous couple of days. And we just had a lot of fun walking up and down the 10 blocks of Broadway where that happened. So that's the story. What was the other one, Dick, that you mentioned?
Well, the transportation maps, I know those are very interesting graphics and very complicated kinds of problems to solve with those things.
Yeah, I think I remember they started, was it London that first did those maps? There's a name for them.
Yeah, well, they were London tube maps. And, you know, if you Googled subways of the world or something like that, you probably see that there are well over 100 cities that have subways. So rail systems. And I knew that there was a London tube map, which made it a little bit more easy to use the tube. But what they did to do that was they took out all the angles, curlicues, twists and turns, and they made them into this sort of 45 or 90 degree grid, different colors, to help you track as you went through the grid where you were going. But they set these up in a way that you could actually, in your mind, you could map this in your mind and say, oh, I go from this line to the red line to the green line, and I'm there. And if you look at a lot of these other maps in the world, they are patterned after that one London tube map. And the one that I showed you that I had done of Denver was just a simple little interpretation of that idea. But the Washington Metro one is a good example of one that was done in that same exact way as the London tube. They took the same rules of the road. Let's make them either 45 or 90 degrees and make them different color and make it really simple so that the average person can look at it and say, that's how I use it. And you realize if you're in this sort of, I don't know, today would be called infographics, I guess. But if you're in this public art or public art business, like I'm really not, but I dabbled in it, you realize that you can have an idea yourself, but boy, unless it comes across and communicates to people, it's really not a very good idea. And so I really learned a lot from watching how people made graphic decisions. But that's the way those are put together. And a lot of cities have tried to do this in that same way because they realize that it works. Is that getting at your question?
Yeah, that's great. I love it. That helps a lot.
I just looked it up. A guy named Harry Beck did the first tube map in 1931, and they built on it after that.
Okay, great. Yeah, it's a classic. Yeah. Sue.
Pat, well, this was really interesting. I wanted to comment that I have been into your house and seen your graphics of Chaco Canyon and of Mesa Verde. Just, it's just the minimal, but it's immediately recognizable of what this is because of the shape. And I assume that was from a photograph maybe that you took, but that's the beauty of it, is that it's got everything extraneous taken away, and you say, oh yes, that's Mesa Verde, that's Spruce Tree House or whatever. If you've been there, you know what it is. And it's the same thing. Oh, that's a fishing village, or that must be in Sweden or something. So I think that's the beauty of it. And I wondered, you say you have like 6 areas. I know you have cityscapes and urban and or country or whatever. Do you have other ones in your mind too that you're working on? How do you get your ideas?
This, well, there was one I was thinking of recently, which was really nature and flowers, birds, bees. I did one of butterflies at Marcia's suggestion. She actually embeds my mind with a lot of good ideas that I then sit and try to figure out how I can do them.
He's my graphic artist in residence, that if I need something, I know where to go.
He's my patron, so it really works really well on the scale. But yeah, that's one that I'd like to do. On this graphic program that I have, the medium really is the message. I mean, I can't do curves very well on this thing. I haven't quite figured that out. I'm still learning how to do it. With my hand, if I had the pen in my hand, yeah, I could draw flowers and stuff all day. And a lot of graphics that I love are curved things. Some of the things that Matisse has done and other artists they managed to do, Sue, what you were talking about. It's really abstract things and get the essentials across without making them so rigid and architectural like a lot of my stuff is at the moment. So I'd love to be able to do that. It's going to take some work to do, but it'd be worth doing.
I think probably that's a project for a year out after he goes off the board and is not so involved with all the Zoom calls.
Between now and then, it's really, let's not tackle too many new projects.
Mhm.
I have another question. You mentioned as one of your people that inspired you, you mentioned Alexander Calder. And when I think of that, I think of the mobiles. Are you thinking of something different? Are the mobiles, were they an inspiration to you? Or?
Well, he had things called stabiles, which are, I think I showed one there, which is a big red one that was out. It's actually out in the Huntington. If you go over to the Huntington and walk out there, I'm not sure exactly where it's located, but there it is sitting out there by itself. It's a big red one. You cannot miss it, but that's a stabile. And so these are not meant to move. They're meant to be massive, rooted to the earth kinds of things, just solid as anything. I don't know if you read any things about Calder, but he was marvelously inventive in wire sculpture. He could take wire and do just about anything with it that you ever want to see. He did something called the flea circus one time, which actually had little jumping fleas in it. It's that scale, small. But he made all these little circus wagons and trapezes and all sorts of stuff in his workshop. To see pictures of it is really quite amazing because it's just, it looks like an indoor junkyard of just everything you could ever make out of metal, and everything you could cut it with or bend it with is right there. And he just looks like he's just the happiest guy in the world to be in the middle of all that. So you can do a lot of different media and still be kind of noted for the mobiles, which are the wonderful airy things that you hang them somewhere, the wind comes and blows them around and they turn. I think that's what you're talking about, Dick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Nancy.
I just found it so interesting the way that you introduced the topic by looking at, you used a human development model where you talked about your temperament type, which is your innate brain structure, and how your life experiences shaped you and reinforced the evolution of this profound gift that you have developed over the years. And it really makes me think that's a very good way for all of us to look at our lives, to examine how the gifts that we give as we are at this age, how they have evolved over the years. I just found that so fascinating. And I also wanted to ask you, how old were you when you first took the Myers-Briggs?
This was 1990 or something like that, 1992 maybe. So it's kind of late. I was born in '39, so I went a lot of years without really getting it. I didn't know what I was all about, and then began to find out through things like that. Earlier on, when I was in graduate school, I took something called from this thing called the Human Engineering Lab. It was in Philadelphia, and I was in one of those row houses. But they had this whole battery of mental, visual, physical testing that they would give you this analysis, and it was when I look at it now, it was kind of had the elements of a Myers-Briggs. I didn't really learn that much from it alone, but then after doing that, the Myers-Briggs and what's the other one? The
MBTI.
Yeah. Okay. All right. There are a couple.
Oh no, the Minnesota. Oh, not MBTI. That's Myers-Briggs. I can't remember what the name of that is. So I think it's got Minnesota.
It's not coming to me either, but I've been always kind of fascinated by that for myself, but also other people. And I've been in companies where I had everybody do the Myers-Briggs or some other test to try to figure out how we all could be more compatible with each other,
Right.
and how we could work with each other.
So
And some of my supervisors and offices have been people that processed information totally differently than I did. And the reason that they were in the positions they were of selling, marketing, organizing was that they really had the skills that I didn't really have. They were, first of all, most of them were extroverts. And I realized that there was a big difference there. And I did go through a lot of years saying, well, why can't I be more like that? Oh gosh, darn, I wish I could market better. Why can't I get out there? But I just wasn't comfortable in that. And I really went through a lot of time kind of agonizing, frankly, about it at certain points. And then realizing, no, it's really, look what I am bringing to it. And fortunately, I think what it takes, though, if you're an introvert, is someone who you work with or work for that understands the skills that you can bring, because they're not the first thing that comes out when somebody encounters you as you know, on the street. They won't see what you have because you don't show it. You know, you kind of wait, and then finally give it if you trust the person that you're interacting with. And so I really had to have people that I worked with. I had a great one in Denver in the last big firm I worked in that, you know, he was one type, I was another type, and we loved working with each other. Marsha, I'm talking about Rich Von Lerty.
Yeah.
He was a principal in our firm, but we knew what the other one could do, and we just used it all the time, and it was so great to realize that you could do that and not have to be the whole comprehensive set of skills. Really,
You're
really.
right. That is truly one of the gifts of the Myers-Briggs. It helps people to recognize their own gifts and to value the gifts that other people have.
Yeah, and then learning how to work with people who are a different type and have a different sensibilities, I think helps. Like this one that INT, the T and F one, the third index, isn't strong one side or the other, but it had, when I took it the last time, it had a lot more to do with making decisions on the basis of logic. And then as I've grown up more, it's really been more on the basis of, well, that too, but what does everybody else think of what's going on? How do other people, how's this going to work? What's the impact? And so you get over to that more feeling side of things. And so I found that kind of an interesting transition. I should take it now and see where I land, but I'll bet it would be somewhere in the middle, but it might be more balanced toward the being aware of others and working with others. And the profession I have been in until I retired had a lot to do with, does somebody else like your work? You know, how does this impact them? How do they bring something to the team? So it's been for me a very maturing profession, but I've always tried to hang on to that one gift that I had and try to make that, if not the main thing, at least something that would contribute toward our direction as a whole. So, yeah.
I have another one. You mentioned when you talked about your Broadway exhibit, you said something about transitory, which made me think about the transitory, the ephemeral nature of a lot of art. And that brings up in my mind the Martha exhibits. I can't think of the artist's name now.
Well, Donald Judd.
Yeah, Judd, yeah. And you know, his work there is basically concrete slabs that in 500 years are going to look pretty much exactly like what they look like right now. Yeah. And I'd like to hear you talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, they last longer than works on paper for sure. Well, those are big scale. Has anybody ever seen any of those things? Marfa, Texas is a center on the Texas prairie. So some guy went out and bought a whole bunch of, he bought a military reservation basically, as I understand it. And these sculptures are just big cubes of concrete and other materials, but they're very, very abstract and very strong, extremely visually strong. So it's just I don't know how to explain it. I like it. I don't think I could ever do something like it, but I think it's.
They're just concrete slabs that are arranged out in the field. Yeah, that's all they are. Just concrete structures that he put up with just concrete slabs.
Yep.
Something like Stonehenge?
Yeah.
Except that those Stonehenge really had some other reasons for being. And Sue knows this about Chaco Canyon, that there were lots of other reasons why particular arrangements of structures were made. Right. I think Chaco's got one place there where they know that there were astronomical observations going on. I mean, this is hundreds of years ago when
Mhm.
you had, I imagine that you had to pass along information from one person to the next to ever get one of these things built. But they really were aware of how the arrangement with relation to the heavens was. But the interesting thing for me that I've always been fascinated by with, it didn't just look like a pile of rocks. It looked like an organized, wonderful structure. And so I found that to be sort of true in looking at city plans as well. My right brain engages with things so much quicker than my left brain. I look at, if I see something and it's a city plan, I can sometimes spot a problem in it just because the diagram looks goofy. And if it does, then it might be that when you dig in further and begin to engage the left brain, that's what you see, is that there is something wrong with that. You know, it really doesn't work very well. It needs fixing. So there's that's one thing that a visual perception can bring to you if you learn how to use it.
Very interesting. Mhm.
So I've enjoyed this. Karen, I don't know how you are doing on time, but I really totally enjoyed this experience.
Yeah, this has been way more than I bargained for. It's just been fabulous. And we have time, and we've not run out of time, but you have covered a lot of material and it's been fascinating.
I have another
Really
point.
Okay.
I have known Pat and Marcia, I just am reflecting on this, over 50 years. And for me to witness the growth and the process, well, we're talking about Pat now, I could say the same thing about Marcia, but to be able to have that perspective of all of these years, we didn't always live in the same place, so there would be gaps of time when I didn't see them, but to see the evolution of the human spirit and the gift of Pat, and just the evolution of a human being in that kind of way is totally fascinating.
Absolutely. All friends are wonderful, but when you've got that kind of history together and you're close, it's pretty marvelous.
It really is.
Yeah.
Very special.
Well, and it was special for Pat to kind of do this exercise and kind of go back and have it evolve the way it came across with the slides, because it was meaningful in a way,
Yes.
like you say, Nancy, over his lifetime of the 80 plus years, but through the stages to see how he was influenced by different people and situations, and that was really fun for Pat to kind of see that come together.
Developmental model.
Well,
Yeah.
just to show the difference between types. Here I am sitting in my studio, which has got a bunch of stuff all around me. Look what Marcia did. She somehow probably instinctively sat where you can see a couple of my graphics. And
Yeah,
some
I
of
did.
her-
I said, there's one graphic and there's another graphic.
Well, that's her first instinct. How do you get people interested in this? You know, how do you? She's got much more of the marketing promotional tool than I have. So
Well,
it works.
So Pat,
know,
have you already had a show at the office?
No, I
No.
had Karen's invitation. She's invited me to, when things calm down a little bit, to come over and put some things up on the wall. So not yet.
Yeah, I think that'd be a hit.
Yeah,
we will definitely have Pat's artwork up on the walls, but right now there just isn't a lot of traffic. And I want to wait until we open up a little bit more, and we're all in a state of flux right now. So when things settle down and people are a little more comfortable coming to the office, when people will really see his work is when we'll put it up. He will definitely have his work up. But what I wanted to say, Pat, is as an artist, I understand. We are just involved in being artists. We're just involved in what we're doing. But having an opportunity to do a presentation like this allows you to step back and look at the mess you've made and all that you've done, and looked at and see that wonderful journey from a perspective that makes sense. And in the case of Nancy and your good friends, they've watched from afar as you've gone through this while you've been up close just doing it. So it is really nice to be able to step back and make a presentation, and kind of put it in a nutshell. And it's been really rich. This has been really wonderful.
It's a super opportunity. So thanks very much, Karen.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
I
everybody.
just wonder what he would have been like if he was a ballet dancer from that first
You
line.
know, I'm thinking the same thing. I just wonder what kind of a tutu he would wear.
You
Yeah,
still have the
I found that delightful to start
You
off.
still have the
reading about
shoes?
that.
That'll be his next presentation.
Yes,
Right,
yes. Stay tuned.
Thanks a lot, Belinda.
So did it work? Did you stop stumbling over your feet?
It really didn't help very much. No, that's why they moved on to the trumpet. And well, why don't we try this? How about that? So I just
Yeah.
had to work it out myself.